Commissioner, you're now live.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David Jameson. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands. It's Tuesday, the 19th of January, 2021. Welcome to the Strategic Police and Crime Board. Just before we go into the meat of the meeting today, which is very full, I would firstly like to congratulate our Chief Constable on his mention in the honours list, and he's now Sir David Thompson. Congratulations to you, David. It's brought great honour to yourself, your family, and the force, and very, very well deserved. Also in our meeting as well with Brendan Connor, who's been with us a long time and goes back to the police authority days and has served on this board. But I think also the work that you've done, Brendan, on the Midlands Air Ambulance has been exemplary and quite rightly has been recognised in the honours list as well. And we do congratulate you for the work you've done, not just with us, but the other work you've done more widely in society. Truly well deserved as well. And also to DCI Jenny Pearson and Michael Bray-Cotton in the force were also mentioned and have awards for their professional service. So very well done to them too. Moving on as well, if I just say that about COVID, this is having a huge effect on us as a society and the community of the West Midlands. It goes without saying, but in particular, seeing some of the reports now of how distressed not just the relatives, friends and others of those who are ill or dying, but also the distress of many people working in the health service now who have worked tirelessly for months and are now suffering, knowing that people who they're caring for are seriously ill and some are dying. And I'm pleased to say now a vaccine or vaccines look as if they're being developed. And well done to the scientists and others who have developed these vaccines so rapidly. And it's a testament, is it not, to our education system from the early years all the way through to university, that we develop people who can make these sort of leaps forward in vaccines so quickly. I have publicly said as well that it is absolutely right, of course, that health workers and those working in the care professions should have the priority over the vaccine. But I'm also saying now, and I've written to the Minister with the Chief Constable and the chair of the Pol Fed as well, to say we think that police officers should be in the next tranche of those who are given priority for the vaccine. Police officers, as we saw over the weekend, particularly are getting in close proximity to people, have no choice in doing so. You can't arrest people from 2 meters away. And that's why I think there should be a priority. So I hope ministers will look at that seriously. It does look as if the pandemic is going to continue for a period of time, and we don't know yet. I'm hearing reports today, tragically, that we are now, as a country, truly world beating, in that I think we've now moved to the top of the world list of the number of people per 100,000 who are dying. I think in months to come, we'll have to reflect on why that is and what has actually caused that. And I made some comment over the weekend about the protests of those who are anti-lockdown and various COVID deniers and anti-vaxxers, some who came to Birmingham for a protest. Well done to the police for the way they handled that and stopped a big gathering of people coming. It would appear that quite a few of these people are from well outside of Birmingham, and I do resent very heavily on behalf of the people of Birmingham the fact that people are coming here spreading false stories about coronavirus is a myth, and also spreading potentially helping spread the disease as well. One other issue that I have raised is the elections that should have taken place last year in May. They were scheduled again for this May, and it looks now as if there's questions being made over whether those elections are going to take place. It is my view that those elections in May for local government, for the mayor, for PCC, and other parts of the country for other roles as well, that those elections should take place, and the government should be making sure that we can do so safely without spreading the disease. And we should do it possibly by having an all postal vote ballot. I think we need to do this and do it urgently. So I think if we delay, things won't be any better in June or July, or possibly even in September. We don't know yet. So I think we just ought to get on with it. And I do reflect that both the United States of America have elected a president, and last week Uganda went to the polls. So it is possible to do this. Surely this country can manage as well. Okay, we have a very full agenda today. The first one, are there any apologies that haven't been notified to us at the moment? I don't think we have any. Okay.
No, sir.
Okay, item 2, the notes of the last meeting. There was one point for action which has now been dealt with. So I don't think there's anything else on the notes. Anything to do with the accuracy or anything anyone wants to raise for the notes of the last meeting? Okay, questions from members of the public. This month we don't have any questions from members of the public. So we go now on to item 4. Item 4 is questions from the board. The questions this month are in my name. The first question to the Chief Constable is West Midlands Police still actively seeking the foreign national offenders who are at large in the West Midlands, who were formerly the subject of European arrest warrants? How have other countries sought the renewed extradition of these individuals? And how many individuals formerly subject to European arrest warrants are believed to be at large in the West Midlands? Chief Constable.
So, Commissioner, thank you for the question. Yeah, thank you for the question. So the change that's taken place clearly with the completion of the transition arrangement and the new agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union does see the end of the European arrest warrant, which was a smoother approach to some of the issues of extradition than we now have in place. But there are still arrangements in place. So when we left the European Union on transition period on the 1st of January, we were holding 51 European arrest warrants, and that had reduced considerably over the last 6 months because of the work we've been doing with European partners, particularly to try and ensure we minimise the number that we've got. So we had 51. All but 6 of these had got red notices. Now, to be clear on red notices, what now happens is when we seek an extradition, because we will have to deal with the individual countries around it, we do it through Interpol red notices, and so we convert what were the arrest warrants into now Interpol red notices. So all of those are being brought up to date, and there are now 45 valid being worked through the Interpol system at the moment to arrest the offender. The way these operate now, there is a national extradition unit that's taken over the management of these cases. So that's who we go through. The cases are prioritised in terms of importance. So there are reds and there are ambers in that group, and they work with local forces to arrange arrest where necessary. It's quite a new process. We can't possibly comment about how quick or how speedy it is in comparison to European arrest warrants, but we do have good structures in place to ensure that we identify those who are outstanding. We do work through Interpol. We do work with the National Extradition Unit, and we will then see what the impact of the new procedures will be as time goes by.
Thank you, Chief Constable. It seems to me, what you're saying there, there's now a considerable amount more work involved in extraditing these people, getting them arrested. Could you just give a feel for how much extra work on an individual case is needed now that we've left the European Union intermediate arrangement?
So that is a little harder to say now. Of course, clearly what we have to do is make the case through the court system to identify we need to extradite people. We flag them through the Interpol system, and then we'll have to work with the individual nations rather than the common approach through the European arrest warrants. So it's a little too early to say. I suspect we might have a slightly different position on different jurisdictions. Of course, there are other things occasionally we want to obtain from third nations as well, and some of the procedures are slightly slightly more complex now to do that. So my observation at this stage in January is a little too early to say how much more work that will involve or not. Certainly the work that's been done with the National Extradition Unit will help us with that at national level, but I wouldn't want to make an assessment on the extra work at this point.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Did anyone else want to comment on that question? Okay, we move on to question 2 then. Is how many speeding offences were recorded by West Midlands Police in 2020 where the offender was a foreign EU national in an EU registered vehicle? And how will West Midlands Police approach A, speeding, and B, wider traffic offences by EU nationals in EU registered vehicles now that the UK has left the EU and the mechanisms for intra-EU cross-border enforcement of fines no longer applies?
Okay, so in terms of this area, this is an area that's never been entirely smooth in any case, because as you can imagine, the cost of enforcement jurisdictionally has to be taken into account in these cases. So we don't have separate data that says where a foreign EU national in a EU registered vehicle was speeding on a West Midlands system. You're probably aware that the arrangements to share that data more broadly obviously elapses for some of the changes, but the occasions where we would seek to use that data transnationally would occasionally be quite limited because of the cost and complexity of enforcement in any case. Our current arrangement remains that actually if we do enforce speeding fines, they are going to need to be done by traffic officers on the road and where a ticket or prosecution takes place there and then at the time. So the arrangements to carry out extrajudicial enforcement is more problematic purely on speeding fines. So it's been a complex, protracted issue in the past, largely because of the cost of issuing summons in foreign nations. So we don't have much detail around that in any case, but certainly from now onwards, we're unable to do that without actually catching people there and then.
Okay, I'm reflecting back to my time when I worked with the Department of Transport, and at that time, back in the early noughties, about 2001, 2002, we were very concerned that a large number of EU nationals were committing offences on our roads, and we had if they left the country, then there was no power to enforce that fine on them. It does look as if we are moving back into that zone now, where these fines can't be enforced. I think that's very unfortunate indeed. And what some people are reflecting, this is hardly getting back control when we do appear to have a system now. It's slower for extradition of people, but slower and more time consuming. And my fear is it's potentially, even on minor offences or particularly the major offences, that some of the criminals may fall through the cracks. And some have observed as well that Brexit might have been good news for the criminals who can now avoid justice. However, the third question that I wanted us to pose as well is, can the Chief Constable update us on the implications for West Midlands Police arising from the reported deletion of PNC records that are held through the Home Office?
Yes, thank you for the question. This has obviously been subject to a significant media coverage across the last few days and the weekend. So this largely relates to the Police National Computer. There are clearly arrangements following things like the Protection of Freedoms Act, where certain items or records will be deleted from the Police National Computer. These records largely relate to people who may have been arrested by the police but not charged. And there are circumstances where information can be retained by police forces under strict criteria for protection of the public. And I'll give an example. There may be a very serious offence that was not able to proceed because of a technical or procedural difficulty, but there is clear evidence that the offender may have been involved in quite a serious offence. And for the reasons of public protection, there are criteria where the police can ask to retain some of that detail and particularly also can retain DNA and fingerprints in those scenarios. These appear to be the records that have been subject to a more automated deletion. We're unable at the moment to fully assess what the implications of that may be. But what we are doing at the moment is putting a number of things in place. So we are attending the National Police Liaison group that takes place to assess this and looking at what the work we've got. We are carefully examining any elimination reports being sent to us on P&C. So we received 103 last week, and we're reviewing those carefully to ensure that we're not being sent things that are automated, and actually there is a correct justification for elimination. So we've got some controls in place for that. We will have a clearer set of guidance, I think, emerge probably after Wednesday, the 20th of January, where we'll have a clearer picture as to what the national situation is. So it's difficult to fully assess it locally, but we have worked through a range of control measures at the moment to ensure there's no risk of anything else being deleted. And clearly we'll work to support what we can do, if at all possible, to return some of the records into existence if items haven't been destroyed. But at the moment, I'm not able to report more fully. But given the public interest, I suspect that at some stage after the 20th, we'll be able to do a fuller report for you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chief Constable. There was a suggestion in a report in a newspaper on the weekend that recruitment processes and DBS checks may have to be repeated. That, of course, could include us who are now recruiting police officers. Could you confirm whether that is the case or not?
I think it's a very good question. So what we are doing at the moment is we're having a very careful look at that on our local records. So we should, for any local matters, be able to see locally our own position regarding any suspects that may be uploaded onto the system. So the scenario we're talking about would be a potential recruit is somebody who may have been eliminated out of a serious criminal matter, where we might have retained the details, and clearly they wouldn't be suitable then necessarily to join the police. So we, and this of course has come up in a number of national high profile cases. So we are doing some careful checking in regards to our own local records to make sure there's nothing that's missed. And this is an area that will be being looked at by the Police Liaison Group, and we're going to wait direction if there's any of our checks for, that we need to repeat. And if we do, we will do that.
I'm reflecting as well that it may be something like even the health department and people in the NHS who are being recruited, because there must be very high levels of recruitment in the NHS because it's such a big organisation. And I'm reflecting possibly they may be affected as well. I mean,
one of the reasons for retaining the data is to assist with the disclosure, barring and vettings arrangements that the police service provide to occupations or groups that work with vulnerable people. So, you know, people might wonder why we would want to retain some data on potential charges and issues for people who've been acquitted. And the reason for that is, obviously, as we can imagine, and Soham was, I think, a good example of that, if you look back in the past, that we clearly will have people who've been arrested for some quite serious offences, which might not actually result in a conviction, but actually may indicate considerable levels of concern that we wouldn't want working with vulnerable people. And that's largely the reason why these arrangements exist, to retain this data in specified circumstances. So it is quite important to disclosure, barring vetting service, that we actually see whether we can, what we can recover from what has been deleted.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Okay, if there's no other comment on those questions, we'll go on to item 5. And I just repeat, if we can keep presentations down to about no more than 5 minutes and be as precise with our questions and answers as we can to allow proper discussion, but on the other hand, to get as much information as we possibly can. So item 5, the item here is on counter-terror strategic policing requirement and serious organised crime. Constable, you have Assistant Chief Constable Matt Ward, who's going to present the paper.
Morning, Commissioner. Morning, Board. Hope you can all hear me okay. Thank you. So this is the annual review of how West Midlands Police is responding to 3 of its requirements under the strategic policing requirement. Unsurprisingly, this year's report is going to be heavily influenced against the backdrop of COVID. So I'll begin with the CT position first on page 3. The CT threat remains a real, significant and persistent threat, with a terrorist attack highly likely, and this is reflected in the significant investigative and prosecution activity which has taken place over the past 12 months, and with a particular focus on nominal management going forward. In addition, the impact of COVID has affected the number of referrals that we receive about vulnerable people who are at risk of extremism, And so the CT network nationally and regionally has responded by trying to get information in different ways, contacting parents sort of online through the Act Early and working through SPOCs in various departments. We're also finding new ways throughout COVID of engaging with and working with both businesses and local communities as we seek to protect public spaces. And we are continuing to prepare our response to support events such as the Coventry City of Culture this year and the Commonwealth Games next year to make sure that both of those events pass off safely and securely. In addition, not only through COVID, but as a result of recent terrorist attacks, the CT network continues to evolve and develop. At a national level, this has been through the CTP Next Generation programme, and at a regional level, we're continuing to pursue our work on Project Amplify, which brings together all four forces closer to make sure we have a single approach to countering terrorism as a force and as a region. If I move on to the public order on page 11, obviously as a result of COVID, there have been very few mass crowd events at either football matches or other sporting events. However, that doesn't mean our teams are sitting idly by. Both the football and events planning teams have supported the forces' response to COVID throughout the past 12 months. In addition, we've continued to manage a number of protests, including the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer, the Indian farmers protests before Christmas, and ongoing anti-COVID protests. And we continue to use our full range of public order legislation and COVID legislation to be able to do so in a fair and effective way, applying the normal policing response and style you would expect from Westminster Police in dealing with those kind of events. So, and we're also looking at new ways in which we can train our staff in a COVID safe and secure way to continue to be able to maintain this responsibility under the public order SPR. And then finally, if I move on to the serious and organised crime update from page 12, the West Midlands Regional Organised Crime Unit with West Midlands Police continues to disrupt serious organised crime groups across the force area. We're particularly proud of the progress we've made over the past 12 months in taking down a number of county lines and protecting people who are vulnerable to being exploited by county lines. Going forward, we're also excited by the development of new serious and organised crime and exploitation intelligence hubs, which will come online in Birmingham, Coventry and Wolverhampton cities, and hopefully in the future into the other towns within the force area. In addition, last year, the organised crime unit played a significant role in supporting the national and international Operation Venetic, which is the UK's largest ever law enforcement operation, which took out a significant number of organised crime group nominals and recovered vast amounts of both cash and illegal commodities. We have, throughout the course of the year, continued to maintain our specialist capabilities, all listed within the paper. And as a result of the spending review, we are looking going forward to be able to grow a number of those capabilities in terms of both their capacity and some of the technological ability to be able to influence and disrupt organised crime groups. And then finally, in terms of serious and organised crime, we are continuing to closely monitor the effect and the impacts of EU exit, and particularly what that may mean in terms of human trafficking and other organised crime activity, to make sure we're able to mitigate any risks and respond appropriately to any threats or vulnerabilities which are identified. So, Commissioner, that's just a very high-level summary of what's in the paper, but happy, obviously, to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable, and thank you for your conciseness and brevity. And what you've reminded us all, of course, is that the crime as usual is carrying on despite COVID. A lot of things just haven't stopped happening, and that the police are very busy on the things that you're always busy on. And I know your officers are working extremely hard on these issues. I think, Brendan Connor, you had a particular point in question that you wanted to raise. Do you want to come in with that one now, Brendan?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I wanted to raise an area in the strategic policing requirement, which is at the end of the Home Secretary's last version in 2005, which is, of course, the one that we're operating to. And it really covers the area of interoperability and blue light coordination. And the question in my mind, particularly in the context of Commonwealth Games, which we're going to be managing in 2022, but also in the context of the Manchester Arena inquiry, how we demonstrate to the public that we have tested ourselves on interoperability and blue light coordination, such that we can genuinely put our hands on our hearts and say that we have tested ourselves and we're satisfied as best we can be that we've discharged the requirements under those two particular headings.
Thank you, Brendan. First, let me congratulate you on your national honour. What's well deserved. In terms of your question, I think we have to start from a position of humility, and I think we need to listen very carefully not only to what comes out of Manchester, but previous inquests and inquiries which have taken place, and recognise that we haven't got all the answers and we don't get all things right all the time, but we are prepared, genuinely prepared to listen and to learn from the experiences which have happened and to make sure things get better. So in terms of our response to some of the terrorist atrocities which have taken place, firstly, my response would be we want to make sure the attack, nothing like that happens going forward, and the work we're doing from the counter-terrorism world and with the organised crime world is to make sure any of those vulnerabilities we minimise and mitigate as best as we can, so we're not faced with those. But we always have to prepare for the worst and make sure we're ready for that worst. Part of that is about the getting that training out. There has been some updated publication of the response to marauding terrorist attacks. New guidance has come out. I think the guidance is much clearer, simpler to understand, and it addresses some of the ambiguities which may have existed in the past. So the first thing we do is make sure all of our staff understand that guidance. They know what their role is, and they know how they're going to enact it should that be required. And then we need to test and assure ourselves that that's actually working. And what we've set out over the next 12 months is a very comprehensive testing, training, testing, exercising and assurance program that brings together the world of the counter-terrorism unit, the world of operations, the world of the local resilience forum, our colleagues who are planning the Commonwealth Community City of Culture and the planning teams of the Commonwealth Games, to make sure we have a joint training program where we can be confident that all blue light agencies are working together, training, testing, making sure our frontline staff understand what's required of them, and being able to demonstrate that we are as prepared as we ever can be should the worst happen, recognising we're doing everything we can possible to make sure that that doesn't take place. So recognising that there are lessons to be learned, putting in place a vigorous and robust training and awareness programme for all frontline staff and senior leaders, testing and trading that in a joined up, combined way amongst all the agencies over the course of the next 12 months that reflects all the different events which will be taking place, and then being able to learn and reflect from that exercising that we've done to make sure we're in the right place.
Okay with that, Brendan?
Yes, I understand the view going forward. I've witnessed a number of exercises that we've done in the past where, to be honest, there were glitches and problems between different blue light services. And it's really a question of how we put into the public domain an assurance to the public that we've tested ourselves as rigorously as we can do, recognizing that some parts of the testing program and what's organized is obviously going to be confidential. But I think it's really important that we give the public confidence that we've really been rigorous in understanding that, on occasion, arrangements fall apart when tested, and that we've understood that we've tested ourselves to the best of our ability, because, we can lose our reputation as a force very quickly if those arrangements don't stand first contact with difficulty or catastrophe.
Commissioner, can I just make a point in support of what Matt said? That just so I know this is an issue Brendan rightly's raised, and I think he is right to push the force on this. It is particularly the multi-agency coordination, particularly marauding terrorism attacks, but in general multi-agency coordination, is the key to success. Of course, in the slow time world of COVID, we are building a lot of capacity about working together. We're also going to bring on, in terms of facilities, the new C3 operations site in Park Lane, which is very much about multi-agency command. So we are actually making some big investments to create a better environment to do this well. But I think in terms of the point Matt said, there is revised guidance that's been issued nationally to blue light services about these attacks. And myself, Phil Loach and Anthony Marsh, the Chief Ambulance and Fire Officers for the region, have all written to key decision makers jointly about this guidance to emphasise the importance and the style we want to have. And we met this week to agree to make sure we support what I would describe as some very short, focus, no notice testing to embed that decision making. Because I think the point you're referring to, Brendan, is there is a moment in this where agencies have to decide how to move forward into a difficult environment. We're seeing that playing out very heavily at the moment around the Manchester inquiry. And of course, one of the things I laid out to the board is while we debriefed Mooring, we the stabbings that took place in the city centre, that quick movement to the scene, particularly by ambulance colleagues, was, I think, very, very significant to success. There is no reason now why the revised guidance should not facilitate a similar response by agencies working together at a marauding attack. We just got to work very, very hard to make sure that's embedded every day. So good meeting to make sure that's put in place. Joint letter from the three of us indicating the importance of it. And we will be working with those two agencies to make sure that there is a regime of testing to make sure that guidance is embedded. And clearly, as we go towards the Commonwealth Games and City of Culture, there will be specific exercises that will run for those events as well.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Tom, I think you have a question.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thanks for the information that's been given so far. In the report, you mentioned how there is ongoing work around trying to prevent vulnerable people, which my understanding was preventing them being radicalised, whether that's into Islamist terrorism or far-right activity. Just wanted to kind of get your view on how well you think those strategies are working at the moment.
Thanks, Tom. So I think there's a number of areas we're doing. So one of the big national pushes, which we are incredibly supportive of, is the Act Early campaign. And this is recognising that, you know, now that certainly our young people aren't going into school or college as much, and education used to be a big source of people identifying those risks. We need actually parents and people, when young people are at home, to be able to better recognise what the signs of early radicalisation could look like. So the Act Early campaign puts out some really useful basic information of the signs that anybody, any parent, any friend, any relative can look at to see actually if they've got concerns, what those concerns look like, and able to feed those back in, and how to feed them back into the system. We've then got, obviously, in terms of once that concerns have been highlighted, we continue to have our methodologies in terms of channel panels, which deal with some of the lower levels up to prevent case management. And again, those have all been refined over the last 12 months because these meetings used to meet in person. They're not able to do that anymore because of COVID. So we're having to move online more. Some of the mentoring support we put in place for young people has had to go online as opposed to sort of in face. So all that is having an impact on how we're able to interact. But I think based on what we're seeing coming through at the moment, we are still A, being able to identify vulnerability, and B, being able to respond to that in a very effective way. I think it's going to take some time to really evaluate how the last 12 months has gone and understand actually what potentially have been missed. We know there is much more radicalisation online now because of COVID, and our ability to always see all of that. It continues to prove a challenge, and we're working incredibly closely with our partners within the UK intelligence community to help us to do that. But the whole of the last 12 months has changed the landscape, but hasn't reduced the threat, and it's just moved the threat into a very different way. So our methodologies, I think, are working, but we will need to evaluate to how successful they've been in due course.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you happy with that, Tom?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Kath Hannon, a question, please.
Yes, good morning, thank you. The primary focus that the conversation has been about is emergency services and that response and that interagency. However, there's a group of organisations who thereafter support victims and families and help them cope and recover with the trauma of the incidents. That's the ability to be able to connect to those services and the funding to support families and victims thereafter is far more complicated than it needs to be. So as part of the review that's underway, will you be also looking at how to unpick that that support mechanism and make it easier for organisations to work within that CT response?
So if we're talking about the recovery phase, sort of post some significant incidents, absolutely a critical phase to which we will play our part and support and assist. You know, we've seen the sort of the aftermath of things such as Grenfell Tower. We've seen the aftermath in the recovery phase from Manchester. We've seen other sort of recoveries in other parts of the country. Really significant, and I think we work incredibly hard with a host of organisations, including local authorities, the voluntary sector, to be able to support that. I think that is all part of the response, and we've picked up on some of that in the work we've done, certainly following the knife attacks we had in Birmingham city centre. What we did sort of after the attacks to try and get ourselves from that response to that recovery and sort of that back to normality, supporting all of those victims. So there are lots of lessons to be learned from that. It is a much wider partnership, clearly, than just counter-terrorism policing or the public order side. But we are absolutely committed, and we are working with those agencies. And again, as part of the local resilience forum, there is a work stream ongoing regarding recovery. Okay,
thank you. And just a second question, please. You mentioned there's an increase in extreme right-wing activities. Clearly, there's been more referrals into the Prevent and the Channel programmes. How have they adapted their activities to match that demand?
Yeah, so we recognise now that the right wing continues to be the largest growing area in terms of extremism threat within nationally and within the region. I always have to caveat that it is still small. So 90% of the threat we still deal with is Islamist, and the extreme right wing makes up around about 10% of that threat, although it is growing by a percentage sort of every few months or so. As part of that, the channel panels have looked to bring in a much broader range of mentors to work with people who are vulnerable to that kind of extremism. So a broader range of skill sets, experience and knowledge, particularly dealing with those combating sort of right-wing ideologies, extremist and hate ideologies, requires a very different approach than what we've used in some of the Islamist kind of threat pictures. So broadening the range of mentors and voluntary agencies we can work with, creating bespoke engagement and diversion plans for those individuals are all working to help us to get to that position where we're as satisfied as we can, but we're doing everything we can to try and alleviate people from that space. The other thing I would say is actually one of the things which is quite interesting when we look at a number of those who are being referred in for right wing, they also have a number of other issues as well, particularly whether that may be some mental health concerns and wider challenges and needs. And so again, using our vulnerability support hub, specialists in terms of mental health provision to help unlock some of that support has proved incredibly valuable as well.
That's great, Matt. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. Wahid.
Thank you, Commissioner. Matt, I just wanted to pick up on the right-wing extremism, as you just mentioned, is increasing, notwithstanding the fact that Islamism extremism is actually the biggest threat. I just wondered if you've seen the influence of America and American politics seeping into the UK in terms of influencing some of the thinking of the right-wing extremists, because we've seen a significant increase in right-wing extremism in the US, and I just wondered if that is being exported here to the UK and influencing vulnerable people in committing right-wing extremist acts.
So historically, as with all sort of terrorist organisations and extremist views, there's a very strong online presence, and that's been no different. So we know there are a number of extreme right-wing sort of neo-Nazi type organisations who are operating out of the United States as they're operating out of places in Europe, that residents from the West Midlands, you know, some of the people that we've had to investigate or support and work with have been radicalised by overseas organisations, as they from the United States, equally from Europe. We haven't yet seen anything in terms of the ongoing issues within the United States at the moment. So the recent sort of growth and sort of extreme right-wing views over there, that's not yet playing out for us, but that may be a matter of time, and that's something we'll continue to closely monitor. But what I would say is we have a really strong working relationship with overseas partners, including the FBI, and they have supported us and worked with us on a number of investigations, which have led to the successful prosecution of a number of individuals in the West Midlands who've been involved in extreme right-wing activity.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or points anyone wants to make at this point?
Commissioner,
Yes. Who was that coming in?
Grinder and Johnson have got their hands up.
Yeah, Gurinder.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just I've got 3 questions, but just to comment on that last thing about right-wing extremism. There's also the influence of some of these far-right or some of these conspiracy theories which have grown massively online and which ultimately lead into far-right extremism as well. So things like QAnon, and these are genuinely cross-border international. I suppose if there's a question with that, it's what is, because these predominantly proliferate online, what are we doing, or what can we do to influence social media providers to take down sites which support these conspiracy theories? My first question that I was going to ask was, in paragraph 14, you referred to India-related terrorism, and this is the first time I've seen this mentioned in any of your annual updates. I'm just wondering if you could give us some more information about that. Is this a local initiative, or is this something which is a national initiative?
Okay, so I'll just take a very quick one. So just in terms of the internet sites, then you're absolutely right. We know the online is a great opportunity for good, but in the hands of some is also a great tool for causing harm. There is a dedicated unit within counter-terrorism policing whose job it is to work with the internet providers. So where we're able to identify particular sites, we're able to move as quickly as we can to be able to close them down. But clearly, obviously, the internet is everywhere, and there's a capacity limit on what can be achieved, but there is a dedicated team that focuses on that work. In terms of your question regarding Indian-related terrorism, this relates to there are extremist organisations within India who seek an independent Sikh homeland. The Khalistan seeking the independent homeland is an extremist, but there are some groups who try to use violence to be able to do that. Some of those organisations have representatives within the United Kingdom and within the West Midlands, because we have a very sort of significant sort of Sikh community. It's not surprising we've got a small minority of individuals who have shown some extremist views within the UK. So we work very closely again with both UK partners and international partners, that wherever we identify sort of those risks, we take the necessary proportionate action to be able to tackle those. And there has been activity we've taken as West Midlands CTU to target those who sort of view sort of extremist views. It's relatively limited, it's relatively small. It can have a wider community impact, and we have seen where we've taken action in the past. You know, we have seen against a small minority of people protests taking place by that activity. But I think it's really important that we don't sort of deny that there are small numbers of individuals who have these views, and if you are planning terrorist attacks anywhere in the world outside of the UK, that is an offence within the United Kingdom that we, along with our partners, will investigate, and if there's evidence, we will prosecute.
Okay, thanks so much. Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine. Sorry, Grinder, did you want to come back?
Yes, please. Yeah, and just on that, I mean, it is legitimate to hold a view about self-determination and the creation of an independent Sikh state. That's a legitimate political view, and to campaign for that is a legitimate objective in a democratic society. So it's a very fine line. I totally understand your view about those who may be propagating terrorism, but there is some care that needs to be exercised in terms of defining that and where that line is drawn.
No, just on that point, thank you, Grinix, because I probably wasn't as articulate as I should have been. Absolutely. So the counter-terrorism is not about what people believe, and we don't investigate people for their beliefs. We investigate those who propagate violence, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So those who are seeking violence to enforce their beliefs, that's when we get involved, not because what people believe in.
Thank you for that, and that's really welcome. We've spoken about prevent earlier. In paragraph 88, there's the table shows the number of prevent cases, activities, and prepare and prevent have both gone down quite, well, proportionately quite a lot year to year. And I'm just wondering, what is that largely due to COVID, or is it due to other measures? And you know, what things have been put in place regarding that?
Yeah, so this is a national reduction in referrals. So we'll see that whilst those figures are for West Midlands, you also see that across all the other regions in the country as well. As I said within the report, a large part of that is a result of, you know, a lot of our referrals in the past have come from schools, colleges who are in regular contact with young people in particular. Because we haven't had that level of contact with young people over the past 12 months, with schools not always being open, we've been invariably seen a fall off. People aren't going to visit GPs, go the places where people will go to and engage with professionals who would then, if they had concerns, would then be able to refer them. That level of personal contact has fallen, which has resulted in this fall off in terms of sort of referrals coming in, both regionally and nationally. The work we're trying to do, as I to explain, was around things like the Act Early campaign. So this is trying to give that information that we would normally expect our professionals to do, share that same information with family members and relatives to say, these are the signs that you can look out for in your loved ones. If you start to see this, that should cause you some concern, and this is therefore what you can do about it to try and help you, whether it's getting more information or making those referrals in. So we're trying to say, because people aren't having as much contact with professionals, how do we take that professional knowledge and give it into the hands of the normal members of the community, so they can help us to try and identify these vulnerable individuals.
Okay, and then just lastly, paragraph 76 onwards about public order, public safety. It's quite a detailed report, and you spoke about this earlier. Just wondering, in the current COVID environment, are you satisfied that you and your officers have the right powers to be dealing with this, or is there something additional that you would be helpful?
So I think in terms of the powers, I've had no feedback to suggest that people feel that they don't have the power to act. Clearly, our approach has always been to engage, to explain, and to encourage people to abide by the rules. And if I had one wish, it was that everybody would do that, particularly whilst when it's the current sort of peak at the moment. But where people aren't prepared to listen to the public health advice which is given, then obviously we have the powers to intervene, and we are doing that, but we're doing it on a very proportionate and necessary basis. So unfortunately, it does detract officers from doing other work, and I think that's a shame, because as we mentioned right at the outset, crime hasn't gone away, terrorism hasn't gone away, extremism hasn't gone away. There's still lots of vulnerable people out there who need policing's help, and every time we have to deploy officers to deal with protest and COVID-related protests, that stops them from doing something else. So I think that's my biggest frustration. But I'm satisfied we have the powers we needed to keep our community safe.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Grinda. And one last question from Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine. Jonathan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Matt. Following on actually from that last point of Grinda's, and it's interesting to note that in the consultation that accompanied the HMIC FRS inspection of public order, West Mids was one of the forces that said it didn't need any additional powers, that those involved in public order policing were satisfied that the suite of powers was appropriate. But following on from that, in previous years' reports relating to the SPR, there's been a notation that the ability of the force to mobilise and sustain its national policing requirement around public order has become more challenging because of the reductions in the size of the force, and therefore the size of the cadre of officers that can be mobilised for public order. Is it still the case that remains a challenge? Do you think, Matt? Is that still an issue that is prevalent in planning for the many public order events that are listed there in the report?
So we mobilise obviously as part of a region and then part of nationally. I think it's inevitable that as we reduce, if numbers are coming down, that makes it harder to maintain existing commitments. We would hope as part of the uplift we're able to manage that slightly easier sort of going forward. As I said at the outset, we're very blessed by an incredibly organised, efficient sort of football and events planning teams who help to do this liaison. We have some incredible officers and staff who show lots of flexibility and willingness to be able to help and support. So recently, when we've had to support activity in Kent, in the run up to and sort of post the EU exit. As a force, we've been able to respond and to deal with some very last minute requests incredibly quickly, sending officers down for several days at a time, and being able to support that sort of that national requirement which is coming out. So as I think of it as a force, whilst it is challenging and it is more challenging with the fewer officers you have, I'm not aware of any occasion where we've ever failed to deliver what's being asked of us. And actually, on more occasions than not, we've gone above and beyond because of the flexibility of the staff that we've got. Going forward, I know we're looking at sort of working with other forces in the region just to review what the, sort of those mobilisation plans look like, just to make sure that we remain as flexible as we can, and we don't impact too much on our business as usual sort of responses.
Commissioner, I just
yes,
answer
Chief.
that very briefly. That one of the myself and previous Chief Constable have always kept a slightly higher level of public order trained staff in this force than comparable forces, and we've done that. And I think it was reinforced, particularly our ability to mobilise in the 2011 riots was helped by that. And of course, the factor we saw in those disorders is there were multiple seats of disorder in the West Midlands, unlike many other cities. So we'd seen rioting in not just in one or two areas, in a number of places. So I've always taken a kind of view that we would like to have a good level of public order trained staff, and we train more than comparable forces. And if you look pro rata at us versus London, we've always trained more staff. We are just going to review that again because I think. We've also, I think, got to make sure on occasions, because the force trains well, we're not asked for slightly more officers than our national commitment is as well. So we have been, I think, having a good debate. I think Jonathan's right, and laser light has picked out that's not been amplified this time, and I think that's because we recognise we are now getting to a stage with uplift where this might not be quite as challenging as it was, but certainly we are going to do a review on the number of officers we've got trained.
Thank you very much, Chief and Jonathan. Okay, just one thing from me. You can be very brief in the answer here, Assistant Chief Constable. I mean, previous years, this paper, when it's been presented to us, has mentioned that riots and civil emergencies would impact on local policing. Could you confirm if that is still the case?
So as we look forward, I mean, we look at both global and national events, and those issues that is still a threat that we have to be able to respond to. And clearly, if that did occur, and if there continues to be anti-COVID protests or they grow, that will have an impact on our ability to deliver local policing. So the threat hasn't gone away, but we are as prepared as we can be for such an eventuality.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions or points before we move on? Okay, just a comment from me. What's very clear from your report and presentation that terrorism is still a major threat to this country and to our region, and Islamist inspired terrorism remains the highest risk, although, as you have pointed out in your report, that the right-wing terrorism is a fast-growing area of business for us. And I do welcome the huge amount of preventative work that's undertaken on an ongoing basis, and I'm pleased that strong plans are in place both for the Commonwealth Games and, of course, the Coventry City of Culture as well. I noticed that despite the lockdown, the Regional Organised Crime Unit have helped get over 40 firearms and 1,000 rounds of ammunition off the streets, as well as seizing over 1/2 ton of cocaine. And I think that's all really excellent work that's been done in helping keeping us safe. And so far this year, I note that that the task force has closed 90 county lines and arrested over 360 people. This work has also helped to safeguard 60 young people who were being exploited by drugs gangs. And I note as well that the lockdown has disrupted the drugs market, with criminals appearing to stockpile drugs, and this has continued to a rise in prices, along with the disruption of the supply routes. And again, these people are causing misery in their communities, and I'm delighted to see that the ongoing action has been taken. So, Assistant Chief Constable Matt Ward, can I thank you very much for your report, for the way you presented it, and for your precise and concise answers to questions. Thank you very much indeed. That has been most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Right. We move now on to item 6, which is 6 and 7, which are 2 items on the emergency police and crime plan, which we published in the middle of last year. The first one is going to be a performance update. I'm going to ask Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner Wahid Salim to chair the next 2 items. Wahid.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And on that, I'll invite the Deputy Chief Constable Vanessa Jardine to present the report on performance.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. I'm very conscious of time and that we're slightly behind time, so I will keep this fairly concise on the understanding that people have had the opportunity to read the paper beforehand. We've mentioned a few times this morning about the unique times not only our country faces, but that also leads into the unique times for policing. And I just wanted to pull out the caution with this paper. We very often base our performance and our measures of performance on year-on-year comparisons, which is a useful tool for us to gauge where we are, and that's how we traditionally measure ourselves. But as we've obviously discussed at length today, you know, the uniqueness of last year and the performance year that we're currently in the final quarter makes that very difficult, and we have to guard against those comparisons. However, it is still extremely important that we understand our performance, we understand our challenges, and we respond accordingly. But we know that lockdown saw people confined to their own homes, and that took away the opportunity for many crimes to occur. And you will note in the paper the significant reductions in crimes such as burglary that we've seen this year. And you also may have noted the 48% decline in crimes in Birmingham city centre. And that was a year-to-date performance, again, which we must guard against, because obviously what we saw was there was no nighttime economy in the city centre, and with retail outlets being shut, many of them being shut, that obviously took away the opportunity for offences such as shoplifting and associated crime. However, as I say, we are mindful of our performance, and I did just want to pull out one specific area that I know the board will have a particular interest in, and that will be the increase in violence without injury and harassment crimes, which have increased. And that is directly associated to increase in reporting of domestic abuse. 1 in every 5 crimes now is linked to domestic abuse. And I did want to give the board an understanding around domestic abuse, because I know it will be concerned. So our research and our information tells us that whilst we have seen a significant increase in reporting, the reporting of crimes against domestic abuse, we have not seen a corresponding increase in the numbers of incidents. Our numbers of domestic abuse reported incidents has remained broadly the same, which means that our number of victims remains broadly the same. We have had a couple of spikes, August and Christmas, but that's not taken us above our numbers for last year. What we have seen, though, is a significant increase in our crime reports related to domestic abuse. And I believe that that is directly related to a focus that we've had on ensuring that our crime reporting is accurate. Our crime data integrity has improved, and therefore we are reporting more crimes against a single incident. For people that like the statistics side of it, we were recording approximately 0.3 crimes for every incident reported to us. That has now gone up to between 0.8 and 1. So in some cases, for every incident that West Midlands Police receives, we are recording a crime. And we've had a particular focus on that. We will be bringing to a future board our preparations and our work in relation to the HMIC inspections, but we think it's very important for victims that we accurately record the number of crimes that are committed against them, and I think that that's been an area of real development for us over the last 6 months, and therefore I just wanted to pull that out. The other area that I know the Commissioner has a particular interest in is in relation to the number of people killed or seriously injured on our roads across the West Midlands. And we have seen with the reduced traffic a significant decrease in those number of people killed or seriously injured. But again, that is directly related to the decrease in traffic, but we are mindful of that, which we think is an important statistic. Deputy Commissioner, I'm going to finish there to allow for times for questions from the panel, unless there was anything specific you wanted me to draw out from the paper, but I didn't want to go through each specific graph and detail in that way, because I know the board will have read that.
That's very kind of you, Deputy Chief Constable. We'll move to questions. I see Kath Hannon has her hand up first, so I'll invite Kath Hannon to ask a question. Good
morning, Vanessa. Thank you very much for the report. Paragraph 15 and 16 refer to a rise in vulnerable adult abuse, highlighting harassment and common assault. Can you give us an idea of what's driving those incidents? Is it DA related, or is there some other issues at play there?
Thank you, Kath. I honestly believe that, again, this is very similar to the rationale that I've given around domestic abuse, and the fact that we are now reporting more crimes against people who are reporting this, whereas before we might have only put one crime in. Actually, our understanding has improved, and we're now putting, a number of crimes, and that has led to the recorded crime increases in relation to into vulnerable adults. But also, we can't take away from the fact that people being more confined to the homes has had an impact, and I do also think that is a feature of why we are seeing some of the incidents increase as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Kath, do you want to come back?
Just one question. Is any of this linked into county lines where organised crime are taking control of vulnerable people's homes and using them for their own ends? So I think you're referring there to something that we quite often call cuckooing, where you're right, where people go and take over. I don't think the increase is. We are very, very mindful of that. Obviously, we have a big focus on county lines here in the West Midlands and are very open to that. But I've not seen a particular increase in that type of recording over the last period. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. My question was around child abuse. Looking at the charts presented, it's quite concerning that there was actually a reduction in reports of child abuse when schools were closed, when actually you would imagine that if people are spending more time at home, these are more likely to occur. Is this likely to be repeated again now that schools are closed again? And are we sure that there are sufficient safeguards for these vulnerable children?
Thank you for the question, Sarah. We are equally concerned when our schools closed about the child abuse crime figures. We know that schools offer a very important safe haven for children, and we also know that a large number of our reports come through the schools. We were also concerned when schools did reopen about the high number of absentees that we saw of people and the young people returning back to schools. So this is an area for us to continue to look at. We did expect to see a rise when the schools opened, and we didn't see that. So there is a concern around the vulnerability of our young people that we are working very closely with local authorities and our partners to make sure that the needs of our young people are addressed.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'll bring Gurinder in, then I'll bring Kath in as well. So Gurinder.
Yeah, just a broader question. So the figures are so things like domestic abuse, where you talked about how the number of victims is remaining fairly constant, but the number of crimes is going up, and it seems to be replicated in other areas as well. How does the current backlog in the criminal justice system impact on this? because if the number of crimes is going up and we're not able to dispose of them or deal with them through the courts because the criminal justice system is at a whole, is that impacting, will inevitably have an impact on victims, and is that actually exacerbating the problem?
So the increases that were recorded are many of them are down to the internal processes that I described earlier. However, you're absolutely right, Gurinder. There are significant backlogs within the criminal justice system, particularly within the magistrates' courts. Crown Court trials have been affected, but are running. Magistrates' courts are presenting us with difficulties, and we all know that victim attrition is really affected by the length of time of investigations and their journey, through the criminal justice system. So there absolutely has been an impact. We are very aware of it. We're working very hard to maintain the trust and confidence of victims who do wish to go through a criminal justice outcome. But the pandemic has definitely impacted upon that.
Thank you. Kath, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thank you. It was just a question about a post-COVID plan and how we will deal with DA and child abuse and all the other kind of incidents that will be reported to the police once the restrictions are lifted. What's in place and how resources being kind of attuned to manage that.
So we were very aware, and we anticipated an increase in reports of child abuse when the schools did reopen after the first lockdown, which didn't happen. So we do have plans in place in relation to how we will address that. Obviously, at the moment, we have a number of officers who are dedicated to our COVID patrols. As restrictions release, obviously officers can return to normal duties, and which gives us some resilience. Our incidents have remained, as I say, fairly low, which again gives us an opportunity to catch up on a number of backlogs. And in fact, particularly in the domestic abuse world, we've had a real positive focus on reducing our number of outstanding offenders, reducing our outstanding numbers of investigations that are ongoing, which is all putting us in a strong position so that when lockdown does release, we are in a position there where we can undertake those investigations. And should those investigations increase, that we're in a good position to do that. We're very conscious of, I think we all probably thought that by now we'll be in a very different position. I think what no one anticipated when we started last March that we would still be here almost 12 months later. But we're very mindful that when restrictions do lift, Kath, that we are ready to investigate and support any victims that come forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan, and then Brendan. Jonathan.
Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. From paragraph 55 onwards, the report talks about use of force, a complicated subject on which we've discussed many times, and it is startling. The chart that's there that shows the continuing increase in the recorded use of force, which we know is going to be almost entirely as a result of increased compliance with the processes for the accurate recording of use of force by officers. At what point, Deputy Chief Constable, do you think this actually starts to provide us some useful information about the propensity for use of force by the organisation? At what point does it actually start to become a useful performance measure at the organisational level?
So you're quite right, Jonathan. We have had a big focus on ensuring that our reporting on the use of force is accurate. It's really important that we have that data. I think it's always important to make sure that we are focusing on this area, because we are discharged with unique duties around the use of force against people that it's appropriate to do so. But I would be really confident that we can, moving forward now, really start to use this data in an informed way. The non-compliant handcuffing, for example, is something that we weren't previously reporting on, but we now consider it important to do so. So I would say that whilst it's important to be accurate, and I'm much more confident now that our data and our statistics are accurate, that we use it all the time as an important way to ensure that use of force is not increasing, that we understand where it's being used, who it's being used against, and help to form activities that goes forward. So we would always seek to use it wisely, but I think now that the data, I'm much more confident is accurate, and so we can be used as such to inform our activities as we go forward.
Can I just add slightly to that? So I do think the data is, you know, in West Midlands Police is now very granular. It's down to officer level. You know, we're starting to get, you know, a more confidence, I think, that there's an accuracy recording. Of course, we chose not to record some of the lower level uses of force in this force, for example, tactical communications and some of the drawing of batons and things like that, largely because actually the recording requirements were cumbersome. I think our recording requirements should be fulfilled by staff. They're not overly demanding. I think the challenge of performance issue is what does good look like, and that always comes back to this issue. So I think we can start saying from the data on disproportionality in some areas that there is a signal that we need to explore something. It might not be right and it's concerning. Of course, the challenge is going to be what does a good picture of use of force look like, and I think that the data doesn't really help with that. You know, I think a lot of this will be trying to get the right culture around de-escalation built into the force work, and it's one of the reasons why the forces work will be heavily involved by the national work on use of force, because there's quite a bit more research I think needed. So good data, useful. We're able to pose the question. We're certainly able to go look in areas where we think we need to try to make changes. What good looks like is actually quite hard to work through, because you know the aim of using force is to protect the public, protect officers, and protect suspects. And you know, disproportionality is a factor of fairness, but it may not in its own right be the criteria to judge the force against.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Okay, we'll move on to Brendan. Sorry, Johnson, did you want to come back in? No, okay. So Brendan.
Thank you. One comment, one question. Certainly the use of body-worn video, I think the statistics in the report are really impressive, and I think are going in exactly the direction that we would want them to go. So I really applaud the force for ensuring that body-worn video is used to its maximum capacity. The question I had was, if you see an increasing number of crimes per incident, but the number of victims remains broadly constant, I would have expected to see a reduction in the non-crime domestic abuse records. But actually, if you look back over 5 years, they're around about 2,500 per month, and they haven't really gone down. Am I misunderstanding that connection, or is there something else going on?
In relation to, sorry, Brennan, in relation to the domestic abuse non-crimes, they've remained the same.
Yes, if you look at the stats in the paper, they're around about 2,500 a month. They fluctuate a little bit, but yeah. If you go back 5 years, it's broadly the same volume every month. If you're picking up crimes that would have been recorded as non-crimes but arising out of domestic abuse incidents, and they're now being recorded as crimes, given that the number of victims remains the same, I would have expected that number to start to drop as they were converted. But actually, it doesn't seem to be happening. And the question is, am I misunderstanding it, or is there something else going on?
No, sorry, I understand now. Thank you. There are two things in relation to that, I would say. The first one is we are now putting in additional crimes where a crime has been already submitted. So previously, we may have put one crime in for a victim. So we might have put a Section 39 assault crime in, and that would have been the end of it. Whereas now we are putting in additional crimes for that victim. So we might also put a harassment crime in, we might put a criminal damage in as well. So that leads to that increase in crime. I think over time, though, you are right, we will see the number of non-crimes go down. So this amount of work has seen a significant impact, but the team that are looking at this only started their work in sort of late October and into November. So I think you're quite right. We will start, I would expect to see the number of domestic abuse non-crimes start to decrease, but it's probably a little bit early to say that, whereas the impact on the actual crimes has been really, really significant in the number of crimes that they have put in against that one victim.
I think the other thing that's going to affect looking at comparatively over the figures is the definition of what domestic abuse, domestic violence has been. So obviously we've got the bill going through Parliament that will widen the statutory definition again. So the range of what interactions are falling within the category is going to change as well. So year-on-year comparisons probably won't be as easy, but I think the point about crime conversion Vanessa's making is right. It's just that the baseline of what constitutes domestic abuse is changing. And of course, if you look at things like coercive control, if you look a few years back, that wasn't actually a crime in the same way. So what's in the basket of recording is changing.
Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Wahid.
It might help if I was unmuted. Sorry. Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable, for the presentation. Really helpful, and thank you, board members, for the question. I just want to conclude this agenda item by a few comments. Very quickly, what we have seen is, and very pleasing to see, the significant decrease in burglary rates, which is higher than the rest of the country. And that the overall crime levels are lower than compared to similar forces. Domestic violence and tackling domestic violence has been a significant priority for the Police Crime Commissioner, and we have doubled our investment since 2016 in supporting victims of domestic violence, and over £4 million is currently being invested in support services for domestic violence, and domestic violence will continue to be a significant priority for us. Unfortunately, we have seen hate crime increasing by 40% since 2019, and to support victims of hate crime, we are expanding the support services for victims of hate crime and investing £200,000 to ensure that effective and efficient support is provided to those who are victims of this horrendous crime. Despite the COVID, speeding offences seems to have risen. I guess empty roads has allowed individuals to drive their cars and vehicles which were quicker, and we will continue to support councils to roll out average speed cameras in danger hotspots to reduce the numbers of people killed and seriously injured on our roads. Stop and search does continue to be a useful tool for the police. We continue to monitor very closely the use of stop and search through our stop and search panels, and I'm very pleased to see that there's a slight increase in the percentage of positive outcomes from stop and search, including recovering weapons and making arrests. However, there is some concerns has been raised in regards to disproportionality, both in stop and search and in the use of force. And I know the force is doing considerable amount of work in addressing and understanding that issue, and ensuring that we continue to have confidence in all our communities. Okay, on that point, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. On the emergency chapter, Deputy Chief, we have Assistant Chief Constable Chris Dodd, who has joined us. So ACC Todd, would you like to present your report?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. I note that you have the paper already, so I will just update by exception. Of course, these papers were submitted in advance, and this environment is very dynamic, so there have been a few changes. So first of all, in terms of crime patterns, I know you've just had an extensive update, so I won't cover anything there. Paragraph 6 talks about redeployment. We have today stepped up our resilience cell to ensure that we can be more agile in the redeployment of staff if necessary, as our abstraction levels have increased slightly, which I'll come to in a moment. In terms of enforcement, just some key changes. Obviously, we are now in a national lockdown. So what that means in terms of enforcement is that there should be no protest under the current restrictions tier 4. And there should be no need for any gatherings, which are quite easy to identify, and those are some of the areas that we've focused on. But otherwise, the enforcement remains as discussed. I should note that we've had positive feedback from some of our all-out days. One was reported in Wolverhampton this week in the media. I'm really grateful to the vast majority of the public who continue to abide by the laws and help to keep everybody safe. In relation to travel quarantines, you'll note that since the paper was written, the travel corridors have been suspended, so there is a requirement for travellers to isolate for 10 days for most countries now. We haven't yet received details of any new quarantine checks as a result of that. We do expect an uplift in numbers, but it should be noted that we to date have had no issues with any travel quarantine checks we have had to conduct, and no enforcement has arisen as a result of that. The vaccination sites, it's quite dynamic, the growth in those sites, but we continue to be heavily engaged with the strategic coordination group to support those. PPE, we are working through the latest advice, but there are no issues in our supply chain, and that availability remains good. At paragraph 38, I mentioned the abstraction levels at the time of writing. That has since risen slightly, so we now have a combined sickness versus isolation abstraction rate of just over 10% of the workforce. In relation to finances, no significant changes there, but it should be noted that the adjustments to income from airport policing, for example, we do expect a further reduction there because the footfall will obviously be significantly less through the airport as a result of the travel restrictions. And on paragraph 56, where we mentioned the fines, should note that first of those fines that has been challenged through the court process is now proceeding, and those processes will follow accordingly. And other than that, there's nothing further to update by exception, Deputy Commissioner. I'm available for questions, of course.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable Chris Todd. Is there any questions anybody wish to raise? No. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Sorry, I was too slow on the buttons there. Chris, thank you for the report. The section relating to enforcement of fixed penalty notices, perhaps just sort of pick through a kind of a bit of flesh out a bit what it is we're looking at there, because clearly the numbers of FPNs that have been issued is greater than the list at paragraph 56. What is that table telling us there? Is that a particular specific process or a particular form of FPN? Just perhaps explain what it is that that the report is describing there, please.
Yes, so I think the first stats that you have are the total numbers around enforcement, and then the second table, paragraph 56 onwards, is the tracking of some of those. So we don't have the details of all of those that have been issued, the current status within the criminal justice system, but we're presenting what information is available at the time of writing at that point.
Okay.
Wahid, sorry.
Sorry, just go ahead. Sorry.
Perhaps explain this. For example, there is at paragraph 60. It talks about 133 number 1 regulations up to 3rd of July 2020, paid out of 368 issued. Then it says the outstanding amount may be within the reminder 28-day period with ACRO. Could you just explain how it can be that an FPN that would have been issued in the period up to 3rd of July could still be in a 28-day reminder period?
I'll probably need to come back to you, to be perfectly honest, with some of the detail around that, but essentially there's a delay in the processing of the tickets from the point of issuance through the criminal justice process, through ACRO, before the notification to ourselves. So although there's a 28-day period for the recipient to pay that, there's then a delay before the failure to pay within that 28-day notice comes through to ourselves for further process. What we don't have is the degree to which we have a delay added onto that 28 days, but that accounts for that gap within those numbers.
Okay, we'll perhaps follow up on that, because I think that's an area of interest. And then if there are FPNs that have been issued that have not been paid within the 28-day reminder period, what action is it anticipated the force will take?
So if the recipient fails to pay within that period, it then goes through the process through ACRO. We have a robust process in place within our criminal justice department, where we will build a file effectively for prosecution and take it through the court process. And so the option is to pay within a period. There's a reduced payment for the early payments. There's an increased payment if it's not paid within that period. And then if there's a failure to pay after that point, we receive notification, we build a file, and we present the evidence to the courts for consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? No, in which case, thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable Chris Dodd, for presenting that report. It's a very good report. Just a couple of comments from me before we end this item. Again, I would like to reiterate my thanks to the people of the West Midlands, the vast majority of whom do follow the rules and understand the significant impact that this virus is having. West Midlands Police will continue to use the 4E's approach of explaining, educating, and engaging, but will move very quickly to enforcement action where there is blatant breaches of the regulations. People should know now about what the rules are and should be following that and understand the serious risk COVID-19 continues to present to us. People do want their lives back. I want my life back as well, to some sort of normality. However, we can't afford to give the virus opportunity to spread at this critical time. Those flouting the rules continue to put their lives at risk, put their loved ones' lives at risk, and put our police officers' lives at risk. And police will take action to keep our communities safe. So thank you very much. And do also pass on our thanks to all the police officers, and I'd like to put that on record for the work that they are doing. It is a very difficult job. This is the first time police are having to enforce public health regulations, and sometimes they do get it wrong, but majority of the time they're doing the right thing and ensuring that people are continuing to follow the rules. And on that point, I'll hand up back to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy PCC. We move now on to item 8, the Commonwealth Games. Of course, we're all delighted that Birmingham secured the Commonwealth Games in 2022. And I think we're all equally anxious that COVID doesn't affect the Games going ahead. So, Chief Constable, I think we're back to Assistant Chief Constable Matt Ward, who's going to present this report.
Thank you again, Commissioner, and absolutely delighted to be able to give this update on Operation Unity, which is the West Midlands Police response to the Commonwealth Games. First, I am pleased to say that the Commonwealth Games planning team has adapted incredibly well to the COVID challenges. And not only has it provided support to the force's general response to COVID, but it has continued throughout to keep planning for the Games, recruiting an incredibly diverse team, which is focused not only on delivering a safe and secure Games in 2022, but also leaving a lasting legacy for West Midlands Police and the wider community. And we're very grateful for both working with the new Director of Legacy for the Games and also funding from the APCC to support legacy programmes going forward. Part of this legacy we want to create is about increasing volunteering within the region. And so as part of the work the planning team is doing at the moment, we're exploring every opportunity to attract volunteers to support the security operation. And we're going to a whole range of different organisations to try and help us, including potentially some of our old retired colleagues who may want to come back and join us. But this also stresses that the sort of security is obviously the key part of the policing responsibility, and part of that is around the private contract security aspects, which remains a key part of the operation. And whilst private contract security will be delivered by the organising committee, it has been done in close liaison with ourselves as oversight from ourselves. And I'm pleased to say we've taken on board many of the lessons learned from previous Games and previous major events, including the Olympics, and the approach that we've taken. So grateful that we now have a very clear financial memorandum of understanding with your office. That's allowed us again to work with the organising committee and to make sure where possible using in-house contractors, multiple contracts, and obviously as a fail-safe Ministry of Defence support. The team keeps providing lots of briefings to key stakeholders, and we're working with colleagues nationally to make sure we will have sufficient resources for the Games with sufficient accommodation and transport. And as you would expect, that all of this will remain under considerable scrutiny by both the Commonwealth Games Commission, the Home Office, and the Department of Media, Culture and Sport. And finally, I'm just going to finish by saying we have now started the process of recruiting the Queen's Baton Relay escort team, which will sort of commence in June of next year, and it'll be the first chance where we're able to showcase West Midlands Police to the rest of the country. And I was aware that the Deputy Police Crime Commissioner was quite keen to join this escort team. Unfortunately, it is only for police officers, so on this occasion we've had to say no to them. That's it, Commissioner.
Thank you very much indeed. Could you just say a little bit more? I know you've got a section from section 9 to 12 on volunteers. I know that the organisers and others will be looking for large numbers of volunteers who will be operating outside of our remit. Could you say a bit about the volunteers in terms of increased numbers of special constables and the cadets in our force? What role do you think they will have to play in the Commonwealth Games?
Well, obviously, we're developing our plans. Our plans are developing sort of every day. We know there's going to be a requirement for a few thousand officers or personnel to be deployed every day of the Games across multiple venues and sites. We believe obviously some of this will come from West Midlands officers, some will come from mutual aid, but we think there's great opportunities for bringing in volunteers, and whether that's from retired officers, whether that's from community groups, whether that's from cadets, looking at every chance we get to be able to replace a police officer with others who can help us to provide part of that security position. And as part of that, so again, the private contract security contracts that we've got. So almost an integrated operation between police, private contract security, volunteers, to make sure that all sites locations are safe and secure.
Okay, thank you. Wahid.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm really disappointed, ACC, Matt Ward, that you're not allowing my good self to. I've been training as well, running around with a torch just to pretend I'm actually doing that just on my days when I'm allowed to go for exercise. Anyway, I just wanted to ask in terms of how if you've got any views about what that legacy looks like from the West Midlands Police perspective in regards to that community, because I think one of the other major opportunities here is also to increase our trust and confidence in the local communities, as well as showcasing what West Midlands Police is to the world, and it's just making sure that we don't forget that the community is there as well, and we need to look at how we support the communities in around the Commonwealth Games so that they get the benefit from this as well.
No, thank you, Deputy Commissioner. So leaving a lasting legacy is as important to me as delivering a safe and secure games. And that legacy will take a number of sort of different forms. So I think that on a narrow basis in terms of West Midlands Police, our ability to be able to recognise this will be the biggest policing operation that we've conducted as a force, and therefore making sure we've got the skills, the qualities amongst our staff beyond the games is really important. And to do that, the planning team has gone to great lengths to recruit staff into the team who are going to be in West Midlands Police for years and years to come, and actually developing and giving them new skills to be able to do, so not just taking the people we've had in the past and the existing skills, but actually developing new skills going forward. So beyond the games, we will have a legacy within West Midlands Police, our ability to safely hold and support any major events sort of going forward. But you're absolutely right, this is also about the relationship between policing and communities. And what the Friendly Games is all about is actually bringing communities into that support, and we get an opportunity here to show how West Midlands Police can actually not only step forward, but is an integral part of our communities, not just in keeping them safe and secure, but actually helping them to flourish and to prosper sort of moving forward. We're going to have visitors from all over the world coming to us. We're going to be on TV screens all over the world. People will need and want to see a West Midlands young, dynamic, progressive, moving forward. West Midlands Police will be the heart of that, and the more we can do to actually engage our communities within that, I think that's really going to help us. And the reason I raise the Queen's Baton is really because I think that's the first occasion we'll see where the planning steps out from behind sort of the shadows and comes in, and people start to see that. And the baton being sort of run through the streets of Handsworth and the Zowls and through Solihull and Wolverhampton and Coventry is going to be a great occasion for all communities to get involved in. And we want to make sure that when they see West Midlands Police there, yes, obviously we want to make sure that the baton's secure, but actually we want to create an environment where everybody can be involved and part of that. So that's the work we're trying to do at the moment. Safe and secure games, absolutely, but the day after the games is finished, an even better West Midlands region that we can all be a part of.
Yeah, thank you for that. Grinda.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's been some criticism that the senior levels of the organisation of the Commonwealth Games, there's a lack of diversity in terms of the makeup of the West Midlands and Birmingham. I note in paragraph 7 where it refers to the recruitment of a director of legacy. And it says completed a full refresh of government membership in the steering group and coordinating group. Are we to take that to mean that diversity has been looked at in that respect? I think this is quite important because we've spoken about the importance of legacy. It will be a really poor legacy to leave if that at senior levels diversity is not respected and represented, but diversity is made up in, for example, the volunteering, and that would be a very poor legacy to leave.
Yeah, so I entirely agree with the premise of the point that actually this is a Commonwealth Games for Birmingham and the West Midlands. It therefore needs to reflect Birmingham and the West Midlands, both in terms of its those who are engaged and those who are helping to run it. And I know great efforts are being made. I know the organised committee are looking to appoint a director to look at diversity and integration within the games, and that work is ongoing at the moment. I think our commitment is from a policing point of view, as we've been really clear that our planning team will be incredibly diverse. We are looking to bring in a full range of backgrounds, experience and skills from across West Midlands Police, and actually from across the regions. We've got colleagues from Staffordshire Police joining us to make sure that we reflect as best as we can what Birmingham and the West Midlands is at the moment, and again we want to reflect that throughout our operation. So I will be one of those continuing to push for greater diversity amongst both the organising side of this and the participation side and the community side.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's not reflected in this report, but we have had data previously and information about the makeup of the West Midland contribution and the diversity of that, which we've been quite impressed by. I absolutely understand that there's nothing much we could do directly in respect to this, but we should certainly keep pushing for it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point you've raised there, Gurinder, and thanks for your comments on that, Matt. Jonathan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Noting that section of the report about the impact of COVID-19 on the Commonwealth Games, and reflecting that in some public sessions there have been some commentary about the impact of COVID on the likelihood of the Games going forward. Reflecting on what's in the risk register that's described there, Matt, is there any sense from a policing perspective that responding to the issues raised by the pandemic will have any impact on the likelihood of the Games going forward? From a policing perspective, I emphasise.
Yeah, so as always from a policing perspective, my job is to identify and understand all risks and make sure we've got plans in place for them. As I sit here today, I have absolutely every confidence the Games will go ahead in 2022, and with 18 months still to go, time is on our side. And the planning processes that we are going through, I'm really satisfied that where there are risks, we're mitigating them going forward. So I'm aware there have been some media comments recently that suggest that we're sort of planning for the Games not happening. That's absolutely not the case. I've seen nothing to suggest that this won't take place. As always, we are cautious. We have contingency plans in place. But my view as I sit here today is Commonwealth Games 2022 are going to go ahead. They will be safe, they will be secure, and there will be a fantastic opportunity for the city and for the wider region.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any other points anybody wants to make? Any questions? Yes, Brendan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Matt, for the report, which is very clear and very reassuring, particularly on the use of private security contractors. I think the strategy is absolutely right to fragment it and to rely on the existing PCS that's provided by many of these venues. I think that's a really, really good approach. It was really just a question on the use of cadets. Whilst obviously police cadets will be part of that, the other cadet organisations, Army Cadet Force, Sea Cadets and so on, would also, I think, want to participate. And my comment was this probably could best be done through the Lord Lieutenant's office, because his Vice Lord Lieutenant, Colonel George Marsh, sits on the West Midlands Reserve Forces and Cadets organisation. So if those organisations need to be engaged with, then it's probably worth talking to the Lord Lieutenant and his Vice in order to start to line up those organisations as well.
Again, thank you, Brendan, for your observation and suggesting using the Lord Lieutenant's office. I'm a very passionate believer in the uniformed youth services and what they can deliver and bring. And our intention is always to engage them. Again, by the Lord Lieutenant's office, maybe an appropriate way of doing that. But we want to involve a whole range of youth services, and the uniform ones in particular, I think, are great credits and benefits to us.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Is there any other point or question I wants to make? No, well, thank you again, Assistant Chief Constable, for your report, and again, a concise report and very well presented. Thank you very much indeed. It's clear that there's extensive work and planning underway for the Commonwealth Games, and I'm sure that our officers will make sure it's the safest ever. But as well as delivering a safe Games, we also want to deliver the legacy for young people in the area, and that legacy won't just be in sport. It's got to be in volunteering and the way that communities operate with each other. And I think the points that you made, Gurinder, it's very important that all of the communities have ownership of this Commonwealth Games. It's not something that just comes and happens to us, but it's something that we're all involved with and actually contribute towards, and it has a long lasting effect on sport, but the community in a more widespread way. So thank you all for that. We now move on to item 9, which is under the confidence and satisfaction section. And I'm going to hand back to Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner Wahid Salim to chair this part of the meeting. Wahid.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we are joined by Assistant Chief Constable Mark Payne, who's going to introduce this report. So Mark, if you can introduce this report, and I'll ask board members then for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Thanks, Chair. So I'm really excited about this work. I think it is transformational. It's something that will allow us really to understand how happy people are with our service right the way through, from sort of the first touch point till the last. So the report sort of sets out the work that we are doing as part of the citizen satisfaction project to measure, map, understand and identify where we're doing good work and where we need to improve. Then the second part of the report sort of describes the work that we have been doing to this point, and where some of the surveying that we've had in place over recent years has led us to. So what I would like to draw your attention to, I think, is that for the first time, certainly in my service, we are able to get contemporaneous information that helps us understand there and then almost where we're doing a good job and where we are doing a slightly less good job in terms of citizen satisfaction. That means that in the same way as you get with British Gas or Virgin, as soon as you put the phone down from having that interaction, you will be getting a text saying, did we do what you wanted us to do? Did we do it well? Are you happy with our service? That stands really in contrast to our traditional surveying methods, which is contained in the sort of second part of the force, where often those questions are asked several weeks after you've had the interaction, where we're never quite sure whether what people are responding to is their level of satisfaction at the time, or whether they're responding to other things that might have sort of changed their opinion since that interaction. And also because of the nature of the sort of volume of replies to our more traditional survey, we're often working with very small survey samples, which makes it much less hard to draw conclusions from, less easy to draw conclusions from. So what I think we get with the new citizen satisfaction work is a great piece of innovation that will allow us to understand at a macro level where we're doing well systematically, where we're doing really good work, where people consistently tell us that we're doing well, and what points of attrition we have then systematically through our processes as people move through. It also allows us to understand down to a portfolio or team or even individual level where you're seeing really good pieces of work. So I would anticipate as the work rolls out, we'll be able to see really good officers who consistently satisfy people, really good teams, and actually teams that are not doing quite so well, and look into those teams and what their leaders are doing differently. We'll also be able to see across portfolios, our Force ID doing a much better job in terms of customer satisfaction than perhaps PPU, and if so, why? So it'll allow us to understand in a much more comprehensive way than we've ever been able to do to this point, what we're doing well and what we're not doing quite so well, and adjust our service provision accordingly. So I think it's a really good paper. It describes a really exciting piece of work, and I'm happy to take questions on it.
Thank you very much, AC Mark Payne. The first question I've got is from Tom McNeil. Tom.
Thank you, Deputy. Two very quick questions. Obviously, one way in improving service and using the information you have about public satisfaction or not is to feed it into your junior officers and future officers, including those doing the degree apprenticeship programme. Have you got a mechanism for feeding back all the learning you've got through your different satisfaction routes into the kind of the content of the degree apprenticeship programme? And my other question is, do you feel, and I know you've got a variety of different ways of gauging opinion, do you feel that you're getting often enough sufficient detail about what people actually mean when they give you a particular score, or say whether they're satisfied or dissatisfied? Do you think you're getting under the bonnet of what people really mean by that?
So if I do the second one first, if that's helpful. So we, alongside these sort of data points, we also have a section where people can give us feedback. That I think is where we get the real benefit, because in exactly the way you described there, people are able to say, I was happy with the service because they did this really well. Conversely, the reason I've given this a poor score is because I didn't think it satisfied me around this point. So we will be able to build up quite quickly a volume of responses that help us understand the things that we're doing well and the things that we're not doing well. So to answer your second point, I am satisfied because of the way we've done the surveying. that will be able to really understand what people are happy with and what they're not happy with. And just to go back to your first point, how we use the data we get then. So certainly degree apprenticeships is a really good example of where we have officers in one place at one time who will be able to sit down and talk to about our expectations against the Citizens Charter and the type of service we want to deliver, but also take the knowledge we accumulate from the surveying process moving forward and say, actually, we were able to see that whilst people are really happy with us when they first come into contact with us in terms of the service we deliver on the phone, well, people are less happy perhaps when they go through the investigative process that they don't get regular updates. Therefore, we want you, as you're moving through your police career, to pay credence to that and to make sure that you take that feedback from our customers and make sure that you keep in contact with them and that you take some personal pride and responsibility for doing it. Of course, while we're doing that, I'll be able to say to Paul Drover or Pete Henrick or wherever it might be, actually what we're seeing is there are some attrition points in the second phase of investigation. Can you look at your systems and processes and see how we can start to deal with some of those attrition points? So it will enable us to really focus on those big macro changes at departmental level, while also focusing in on individuals and teams who are doing really well. So I'm really happy it'll do all the things that you say, and I do think we will see an improvement in customer service across the board as a result.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Kath.
Mark, thank you for your report. My question is about operation overview. So it sounds like all the outstanding offenders for domestic abuse have been arrested and dealt with in whatever manner they would have been dealt with. But I assume quite a number of them would have gone into the criminal justice system. So, and as we know now, that there is significant backlogs in the magistrates and also the Crown Court. So what's been done to follow through with victims from a satisfaction point of view? And I don't mean individual cases, but from a holistic point of view, so the force understands what's happening to victims who are now trapped within the backlogs of the criminal justice system, and how that's reflecting on how DA decision making is across the force at the moment. Okay, Kath. So I'll give a partial answer to this because I think this has actually been run through Jane Meir and the Crime Governance Board in terms of the overview response. So we know that we've got now significant delays in the criminal justice system. We know that as a result of that, particularly in DA, where the confidence of the victim is so important and the need to respond at pace is important, that is something that is likely to cause some attrition to successful criminal justice outcomes. I know because I've heard both Jenny Skirm and Jane Meir talk about this, that they are very sensitive about it and they're doing everything they can to try and prioritise through the criminal justice system cases of DA and actually the most serious cases of DA to get them in front of the court and get the victims some satisfaction before they either become victims again or lose confidence in the criminal justice system, which leads to them walking away. I know that in the criminal justice portfolio, the victim care team and the victim liaison team have been asked to prioritise around some of the areas where we traditionally lose people, and DA is actually, as you would expect, at the top of that list because of the nature of the people who are victims of DA. We see very high attrition rates through the criminal justice system because people are often complaining about people they have complex relations with. So the victim care unit have been asked to prioritise the people who are in the system, but who are in the system and likely to walk away from the process because of the issues that I've just described. So it is being tracked, it is being prioritised. You'll have seen from the news this morning that actually there is a really significant problem in the criminal justice system, which I know Jane and CJ are working really hard to try and overcome. And as a result, they have asked victim and witness care to prioritise DA victims through their work. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kath. And Jonathan.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. A question about the potential linkage between this work, which is extraordinarily welcome and one that we've been wanting to see for a while, and the work around preventing misconduct and ensuring that high levels of conduct by officers and staff. Is there a potential for us to start to use this data to look for the circumstances in which there is a risk of misconduct, so that we can start to say, here are the circumstances in which it is more likely that an interaction between an officer or a member of staff and the public goes awry? This was one of the themes that's in the Fairness and Belonging programme that we're quite keen to progress. How can we weave these two things together?
So it's a good question, actually, Jonathan. So at the highest level, what we intend to do with this data is to share with managers and line managers, so that they're aware of how their staff are performing, and we'll have a click database where they'll be able to do as we can around a whole host of other things. Really in depth, it looks at how people are dealing with people, and are they doing a good job and satisfying people. So you'll have that normal line management information that will be available. I can tell you, as a former head of professional standards, and professional standards have been part of this project board, which has been really helpful. But I can tell you that what you often see is a direct correlation between those people who don't answer their DocuTrack queries quickly enough, who have slightly more sickness than other people, who generate slightly more complaints than other people. And I think it would be a reasonable assumption the people who don't have good customer satisfaction scores will also fit into that former basket. You tend to see patterns of work from people who end up in that counter-corruption or that PSD basket, whereby across a range of factors they're actually underperforming against their colleagues. So one of the things that PSD are really excited about this, it will give them some metrics that they'll be able to identify people who are consistently poorly performing around customer satisfaction. Now, whilst we don't want to prejudge that, because some people, there'll be a range of factors why that happens, but often it's a really good marker where people are not performing well in one area, that they will then underperform against a range of other factors. So PSD will have some data that will help them identify individuals. And then back to your original point, what we'll be looking for, where systematically we are starting to see indicators that we can pull out of the data that do help us understand, are we performing poorly against one demographic? Are we performing poorly in one area? Are we performing poorly systematically, for example, around the second wave of investigation in PPU? We'll be able to pull all that data out and help us understand systematically where we are not doing a great job, and then look into that data alongside PSD for people in that basket who might have some other tells that will help us identify individuals, but also sort of systematically where we are falling down. So PSD have worked with us on this. Some of the questions have been slightly altered to help them with their work and help them identify sort of pinch points and attrition points. So I absolutely do think it will help PSD. It'll help them systematically, but also help them with individuals who spike in these areas, because they will typically be individuals who spike in other areas, and they're the kind of individuals who we really ought to be focusing PSD's efforts on. So I think it'll be really helpful to them.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, we'll move on to Gurinder.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Just kind of want to develop that theme from the Chief Executive slightly. It's in terms of what happens with the data once you've got it, and two parts to this question. One is, how do we show that the data that's been collected, whether it's in relation to disproportionality, whether it's in relation to particular conduct, individuals, whatever it is has resulted in a change in practice by West Midlands Police? How do we demonstrate that? How does that appear in a report like this in the future? And the second part of that question is, how does that data, once it's generated, because if an individual has completed a survey of whatever kind, and whatever their views are, one way of increasing their satisfaction would be to give them feedback in terms of how the information they provided has led to change within West Midlands Police. How can we do that? Is that a part of the programme? Is that part of the plans?
So thanks for the question, Gurinder. So in terms of the second part, So we haven't done that. We haven't introduced a feedback loop directly, sort of systematically, if you like. But what we will do is make that information available to line managers. So line managers will be able to go in and pick out, you know, PC Smith has had a particularly poor month in terms of customer satisfaction. Let me go in and have a look at the scores that they have got, and then some of the commentary that sits behind it. So a line manager will have access to information that will help them understand, you know, PC Smith has gone off kilter this month, and here's what people are saying about him. That line manager, then my expectation will be, as part of their regular conversation, should be sitting down with PC Smith and saying, you had a really bad month last month in terms of customer satisfaction. Some of the things that people have said about you are that you were, you know, rude, or that you didn't get back to them on time, or that you, you know, didn't do what you said you were going to do. So it'll give line managers some rich data to be able to have personal one-on-one conversations, and that they will get that feedback back from the individual. It may well be, and it's something that I would probably advocate, that if somebody gives a particularly poor review of a piece of work, then it may, you know, as part of our response to that, the line manager could consider picking up the phone to that individual and saying, well, actually, I'm really sorry that happened, and here's why, and we'll try and take the learning from that. So I think on an individual basis, line managers will have the option of going back to people. That data will be available to them. In terms of how we show performance, so I suppose I see this as a real step change now, Green. You will be able to see, and I will be able to show you, and the force will be able to show you, really from this point on to the future, a really rich set of data that will help you see where we're doing really well, where we're struggling, and then I would expect the question to come back from you, well, what are you doing about it? So as part of our response to that survey data, we will be, as part of our performance regime, holding line managers, departmental leads, and portfolio leads, if necessary, to account to what are they doing about the information they're getting. So I would hope to be able to report back to you with, here's the data. And the second part then, I think, is what you're asking is, and what are we doing about it? So if, for example, we get data that shows us systematically over time, we lose lots of people's confidence in the transition from initial investigations in Force ID into the allocation to an investigator, and then the response of that investigator to the individual. I will then be able to go to Paul Drover and say, Paul, we are seeing attrition here in Force ID between those contact points. I want you to have a look, please, at how we make that better. What can you do systematically to improve that? Be that training for the sergeants who are receiving the crime reports, or be a system change that means actually we remove one of the contact points because we can see that it's not working very well for us. So you'll give us a really rich data sets to come back to you on, and then give me an opportunity and the force an opportunity to tell you what we are doing about it, which I think will be wildly different from what we've been able to achieve to this point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Thank you, ACC Payne, for your presentation of the report, and for board members for asking the questions. I think it's very important that not only do we understand how our members of the public feel confident in West Midlands Police, but also the level of satisfaction that they get from the service that we provide and the interaction that they have with West Midlands Police. And any public organisation must understand the perceptions and the satisfaction of the service that we provide, and also to use the feedback as a mechanism for continuous improvement and continuous engagement with the members of the public. What's unfortunate is that the backlog that we're seeing in the courts may impair these confidence levels, and the joint inspection reports that were published today lay that out very clearly, and have called for the government to take urgent action to tackle the backlog, so that the victims and witnesses can continue to have confidence in the criminal justice system as well. And on that point, I'll hand back over to the Commissioner. David, you're on mute.
Apologies, my button seems to be triggering back onto mute again after I leave it. We come on to we left all the reports, so we come now to the Chief Constable's update. Chief Constable, have you something to update us on?
Yeah, Commissioner, because of the agenda, I'll just update on one item today, really, which is the result yesterday at court in terms of 4 very young men being convicted for the murder of Keelan Wilson, a young child in Wolverhampton in May 2018. I just want to draw attention to the case, I guess, because I think we'll all be struck by the absolute tragedy of the circumstances. But I just want to pay credit to the investigation and the work that's gone into this. As we can see, this is coming close to 2 years ago now. I think it reinforces the determination the force has around the issues of youth violence and the determination to bring cases to court and the corrosive impact if cases aren't brought to justice. And so I'm really pleased with the work the team have done. It's been a terrible time for Keelan's mum and his entire family, and I hope there is some small level of comfort that we've actually managed to bring these people now to justice. It's required a tremendous amount of work. We've had a wide-ranging agenda today, obviously, as always. The work the force is doing around COVID work, and particularly the challenges we've had, such as this week's demonstrations, just demonstrate what a busy time it is still for the force. But I think we've discussed quite a lot of policing today. I don't think there's anything additional I need to add to the agenda today. So thank you. That was my update.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Chief Constable. And, we reflect, of course, the boy who was murdered and his family are victims of a most appalling crime. But, I often reflect as well that some of the families of the perpetrators also grieve as well for what's happened to their son or daughter. And it is, nobody wins in this situation. It is truly dreadful. And there's a lot of victims created, both on the perpetrator side and particularly, of course, on the side of the victim. Okay, thank you for the update, Chief Constable. So we come on to item 11, which is the work plan, Chief Executive Work Plan.
We have 2 meetings left in the current term, assuming all things being equal in relation to the elections. The next meeting is on the February the 16th, with a focus on our work on supporting victims of crime.
Okay, any questions on the Gurinder?
Just a quick question. Is there a plan to bring anything about the audit and committees, the joint audit committee, and the programme of work that's been undertaken before the end of the term? Because I think that has been quite comprehensive over the last year, and certainly board members and the independent members have contributed to that.
Thanks, Gurinder. We would be reporting on the Joint Audit Committee as part of the end of term report at the meeting on the 16th of March.
Yeah, thanks, Gurinder. Any other points anyone wants to make? No? Okay. We come then to the date of the next meeting, which has just been mentioned, which is going to be the 16th of February 2021. And we were assuming that there'll be only 2 more meetings, but that will depend, of course, where the election takes place. Who knows? I might be still here all the way through the Commonwealth Games as well. But I certainly hope not. It's my ambition that the elections should take place in May. And what should we say? There's an orderly transfer of power. Where have we heard that recently? That should take place. Can I then conclude the meeting by thanking you, Chief Constable and Deputy Chief Constable, and your senior staff for your reports today. They're always good, but I think today we've had particularly excellent reports, to the point, good written reports, but good to the point explanations from various officers, and that has been very good. And I also thank very much the board members for the attendance and for your questions and commentary as well, which have been most helpful. And also thank what I hear is an increased number of people who listen into our proceedings from outside. Can I thank you for your presence as well? So with that, I then declare this meeting